Life has a way of taking everything from you in a single moment. Not gradually, not with warning, not with the courtesy of preparation. Just all at once, in the space of a breath, in the time it takes to open a door, or read a note, or watch a pair of taillights disappear into the snow. And then, if you survive it, if you make it through the hollow weeks that follow, if you find some reason to keep getting up in the morning, even when the morning offers nothing, life has another way, just as sudden, just as total, of giving you something back. Something you never expected. Something better than what was taken. Something that makes you understand, finally, that the loss wasn't the end of the story, but only the end of a chapter that needed to close before the real story could begin. We cannot see this while we are in the middle of it. The person in the cold apartment, in the darkest nights, in the hollowed-out weeks of the worst season of their life, cannot possibly know that the worst thing that ever happened to them is also clearing the path for the best thing. We can only know it from the other side. Today, I want to tell you the story of Logan, and of everything that was taken from him, and of everything that was given back. Let me start at the beginning, on a Christmas Eve that Logan expected to be the best night of his year. He had been driving for 11 hours, the kind of driving that professional truckers do with the particular competence of long practice, the body and the mind settling into the rhythm of the road the way musicians settle into a piece they know well. Present, alert, but also at ease, the skill running underneath the conscious attention like a current. He was navigating a Midwestern blizzard that had been building for most of the afternoon, the kind that packs the air with snow so thick the headlights bounce it back at you, and the road becomes a matter of instinct as much as vision. He had driven through worse. He was not afraid. He was also the happiest he had been in months. This is the thing I want you to understand about Logan on that particular night. The road and the blizzard and the 11 hours were all ordinary, all within the range of his professional life. What was not ordinary was the small gold box in his glove box. He had stopped for it 3 days earlier, at a jeweler in the city where he had finished his last haul, and he had spent 45 minutes in the shop with a woman named Margaret, who understood that a man agonizing over a necklace for his wife deserved her patience. He had ended up with a gold chain and a small pendant, not extravagant, but genuinely beautiful, the kind of thing that would look exactly right on Harper's collarbone. Margaret had wrapped it in gold tissue paper and put it in the small gold box, and he had driven away feeling like a man who had made exactly the right decision. He and Harper had been married for 4 years. He had been a trucker for 7, which meant that 3 years of their marriage had happened largely on the road and on the phone, and in the particular intimacy of reunions that people who are often apart develop. The specific intensity of time together that compensates for the quantity it lacks. He knew it was hard on Harper. He knew she had expected, when they married, that the trucking was temporary, a means to an end, and that the end had not appeared on any visible horizon. He knew she had started the job with Miles 18 months ago, and that Miles was the kind of employer who expected his employees to be available in ways that Logan sometimes found uncomfortable to think about too directly. He knew all of this. He had pushed it down. The available action was to drive and save, and eventually have enough for the garage he wanted to open. The gold box in the glove box was a down payment of a different kind. A promise. A proof that he was thinking of her even through the 11 hours and the distance. He pulled off the highway at 10:47 and drove the 12 minutes to their apartment building, through streets that had the particular emptiness of a holiday night in a blizzard. He parked the truck, got the gold box, put it in his coat pocket, and walked through the snow to the entrance. The apartment was dark. He thought she might be asleep. It was late, and she hadn't answered his last call from the road. He unlocked the door and found the light switch, and the apartment came into view, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before he fully understood what he was seeing. The apartment was not just dark. It had a quality of emptiness that goes beyond mere absence, the particular feel of a space that has been deliberately vacated. Certain things were gone. He could see, even from the doorway, the gaps where things had been. The framed print she loved above the console table. the small decorative items that had personalized the space in ways that are not visible until they are missing. He walked further in, slowly, the gold box still in his coat pocket, and he found the note on the kitchen counter. She had not written a long note. This is the thing about endings that people don't always understand. They are often brief. The note said, essentially, that she was sorry, that she had tried to tell him and hadn't been able to, that she needed a life that was different from this one, that she was going with Miles. She wished him well. She was sorry. He read it twice. He put it down. He stood in the kitchen of the apartment that had been their home and felt the cold of it. It was actually cold, the heating having been off long enough that the temperature had dropped. And the cold and the emptiness were the same thing, the same information arriving through different channels. He went to the window. He looked at the snowy street below without particular intention, just the instinct to look at something outside himself, and he saw them. A black Mercedes, luxury, idling at the curb with its lights on. He recognized the car. He had seen it before, picking her up from the building, and he had done what he always did. Pushed the discomfort down and focused on the road and the savings and the garage. The rear door was closing, and Harper was inside, and Miles was in the front. And the car pulled away with the smooth, unhurried confidence of something expensive. And Logan watched its taillights diminish in the snow until they were small red points, and then nothing. He stood at that window for a long time. The weeks that followed were the worst of his life. There was alcohol, the specific self-medication of a person in acute grief who knows it isn't helping and doesn't currently have access to anything that helps more. There were days he did not leave the apartment, did not answer his phone, was not, for want of a more precise word, okay. There was Christmas itself, which is cruel timing for an abandonment. The holiday laying its demands for warmth and connection on top of a situation that was the opposite of warm and the opposite of connected. He existed inside those weeks in the particular way of someone whose identity has been organized around something that is no longer there. He had been a husband, a man working toward something, a person whose sacrifices were in service of a shared future. And then, in the space of a note on a kitchen counter, none of that was true. What remained was the apartment and the job and the $43 necklace he had left on the counter beside her note because he didn't know what else to do with it. And then there was Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson lived in the apartment across the hall and was 73 years old and had been widowed for 6 years. In the quiet accumulation of those 6 years, he had developed an attention to the lives of the people around him that was not intrusive but was very present. He heard the things that carry through walls, the silence in this case, which has its own acoustic quality, the silence of someone not moving, not cooking, not doing the ordinary things that people do. He knocked on the 3rd day, left soup on the 4th. On the 5th day, Logan opened the door. What Mr. Thompson did was not dramatic. He had no speech prepared. He sat in Logan's kitchen and drank coffee and talked about his wife, Eleanor, about losing her, about thinking for a long time that the life he had built around her was finished, about discovering slowly and with considerable difficulty that it wasn't finished, but different. He said grief is the cost of love, and that the cost is real, and you have to pay it, and there's no shortcut, but that paying it is also the proof of what you had, and the proof matters. He said, "You are not done." He said it simply, as a fact, the way you say things you know to be true. Logan was not done. He went back to work 3 weeks after Christmas Eve, the earliest his employer would take him back, and he drove. He drove the way he always had, with the competence of long practice, and the road gave him something to be present in, something for his body to do while the rest of him processed the months of unanswered unease, and the note on the counter and the taillights in the snow. He was not healed. He was moving, which was not the same thing but was what was available, and he had learned from Mr. Thompson that moving was enough for now. He was at a gas station on a Tuesday afternoon in January, filling the tank in a light snow that was the afterthought of a larger storm, when the young cashier came running out to the truck. She was maybe 19, and her face had the particular look of someone who needs help and is not sure how to ask for it. She said, "Sir, I need help. There's a woman inside who's having her baby, and the ambulance can't get through. The road on the east side is completely blocked, and she needs a hospital right now." Logan went inside. The woman was in the small waiting area near the coffee station, and she was in labor. This was immediately apparent. There was nothing ambiguous about her condition. She was in her late 20s, dark-haired, managing her contractions with the focused, slightly desperate concentration of someone trying very hard to maintain control over a situation that is not cooperating with control. Her name was Samantha. She was alone, driving back from her mother's place when the contractions started accelerating faster than expected, and she had pulled into the gas station because it was the only thing visible in the whiteout conditions. Logan did not deliberate. He said, "My truck has heat and it can get through this road. Let's go right now." The drive to the hospital took 38 minutes. He drove as fast as the conditions allowed and sometimes faster, and he talked to her the entire time. The specific talk of a person trying to keep another person anchored in the present. Keep talking. "Tell me something. What's your baby's name? How long have you been driving? Tell me something else." She answered in the pauses between contractions, and in the way of people in extremis, she said things that came from less guarded places than ordinary conversation allows. And then, midway through the drive, between one contraction and the next, she turned and looked at him directly for the first time. Really looked, not the peripheral glancing of a person managing pain, but a full and focused look. And her face changed completely. She said a name, not his name. She said, "Everett." She said it with the weight of someone saying the name of someone they have lost, with all of that loss in the saying of it. She reached for his arm, and he felt her grip tighten, and he said gently, "I'm not Everett. My name is Logan." She looked confused for a moment, and then another contraction arrived, and the conversation was over. The hospital staff met them at the entrance. Samantha was taken immediately, and Logan waited. He waited a long time, in the particular state of a person who has just done something urgent and is now in the aftermath of it, the adrenaline unwinding slowly. A nurse came out 2 hours later and said, "Mother and son are both doing well. She's asking for you." He went to the room. Samantha was in the bed with the baby on her chest, exhausted and relieved, and something else. She looked like someone who had seen a ghost and was still processing the encounter. When she saw him in the doorway, the something else intensified. She said, "I know you're not him, but you look exactly like him. It's his face. It's exactly his face." He sat down. He said, "Tell me about Everett." She told him. A fishing trip the previous September with Everett's old friend from the neighborhood. The one she had never liked. The one whose name was Brooks. The Coast Guard call. The boat that went out with 2 men and came back with 1. The accident story Brooks had told. Everett going overboard, the search that found nothing. And the months since, Brooks coming around the apartment too often, calling too often, appearing in places that were coincidental enough to deny, but too frequent to accept as coincidence. And the deep, instinctive, unverifiable certainty she carried that what had happened on that boat was not what Brooks had told the Coast Guard. Logan drove home from the hospital that evening and did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table and turned it over and over in his mind. The woman who had said a name that wasn't his in the cab of his truck, the way she had looked at him, the weight in her face that went beyond grief into something that was still trying to find its shape. He drove the next morning to the orphanage. He had not been back in 15 years. The old 3-story brick building at the edge of the city that had been his entire world until he aged out of it at 18. And it had the particular quality of places that hold a great deal of childhood. Slightly smaller than you remember, carrying the specific emotional weight of things that shaped you in ways you can no longer fully trace. Mrs. Sawyer was still there, in her late 60s now, with the settled manner of someone who has spent their career in difficult service and has made peace with it. She knew who he was before he said his name. He saw it in her face when he walked into her office. Recognition, and underneath recognition, something that looked like the careful management of a very complicated feeling that had been managed for a very long time. He sat down across from her desk and he said, "I need to know if I have any family." She was quiet for a moment. The quality of the quiet was the quality of a decision being made. And then she said, "Yes." She put her hands flat on the desk and she told him. He had come in as an infant with another infant, identical. The orphanage in those years was severely overcrowded, and a family from the coast had come looking to adopt, and she had. She paused here. She looked at her hands. She said it the way you say things that have cost you sleep for many years. She had allowed it. She had allowed the separation. She had told herself they were too young to know each other, that each would have better chances individually. She had lived with that decision for 36 years. The boy who left was named Everett. She said it and watched his face. Logan sat in Mrs. Sawyer's office and understood several things simultaneously, in the compressed and terrible way that certain understandings arrive. Everett was his twin brother, the man who had died on a fishing boat in September, whose wife had gasped at Logan's face in the cab of a truck, whose son had been born while Logan held his hand. That man was his brother. And the man named Brooks, who had come back from that boat alone and had been stalking Everett's widow ever since, had almost certainly killed him. He drove to the hospital that afternoon, and he sat with Samantha and the baby, Charlie, she had named him, and he told her what he had found. He watched her face absorb it. He watched her put together the same understanding and reach the same conclusion, and sit with it in the way that conclusions of this magnitude demand to be sat with. He said, "I'm going to do something about this." She said, "Logan, he's dangerous." He said, "I know." That evening, he parked down the street from Samantha's apartment building and waited. The car was there within 20 minutes, an older sedan parked across from the complex with a clear view of the entrance. A man behind the wheel watching the building with the specific, unbroken attention of someone doing something he knows is wrong and doing it anyway. Logan had seen a photograph of Brooks. The match was close enough. He thought about the plan for a while, turning it over. He had not done anything like this before. He was a trucker, not an investigator, not someone trained for any of this. What he had was simpler and stranger than training, and he believed it was sufficient. He had Everett's face. He called Samantha and told her to take Charlie to Mr. Thompson's apartment, explaining quickly. Samantha did what he asked without argument. Then he went to the apartment. He turned on the voice recorder on his phone. He put it in his shirt pocket with the microphone end up. He unlocked the apartment door and left it slightly ajar, and he sat in the chair facing it and waited. He heard footsteps in the corridor about 20 minutes later. The door pushed open. Brooks was large, broad-shouldered, with a key that told its own story. He came into the apartment with the ease of someone who has been coming in for a while, who has made himself at home in a space that is not his. And he was 3 steps inside before he looked up. He looked up and he saw Logan's face. What happened to Brooks in that moment was not simply shock or fear, but something that bypassed all ordinary emotional processing and went directly to a more primitive part of his nervous system. The color left his face completely. He stepped backward. His mouth opened and no sound came out for a moment, just the shape of words that weren't arriving, and his eyes stayed fixed on Logan's face with the total attention of someone looking at something they cannot fit into any available category of the possible. Logan did not move. He sat in the chair and said nothing. He let the silence work. Brooks said, You're dead. I watched you. You went under. I watched." He stopped. He took another step back. His voice, when it came again, had broken into something below the ordinary register of speech, coming from the place where truth lives when we have been trying to keep it down. He said, "I threw you off the boat. How are you? You're supposed to be dead. You went under and you didn't come up. I was sure." Logan stood up slowly and crossed the room slowly and watched Brooks come apart completely under the weight of what he believed he was seeing. The confidence and the calculated menace dissolving in real time, leaving behind the raw and undefended thing underneath. Logan leaned close, he said, quietly, into the ear of a man who believed he was hearing the voice of someone he had killed. You made a mistake. You left a witness. Then he stepped back and called the police. He sat in the corridor and waited, and he thought about Everett, the brother he had never known, separated in an orphanage at 2 years old, raised in a different city by different people, living a parallel life on a different track. He thought about the fishing boat and the cold September water and what Everett had felt in those final moments. And he thought, I am here. You are heard. It is not over. The trial took 8 months. Logan testified. The recording was admitted into evidence. 2 elderly fishermen who had been on the water that day, who had seen a drifting boat, 1 man where 2 had gone out, the direction of the current, details that taken together told an unambiguous story, testified for 4 days. Brooks's attorney was competent and worked hard and could not make the recording into something other than what it was. Brooks received 25 years. Logan took over Everett's car business, a small operation, a used car lot with a repair shop attached, needing attention, and Logan gave it attention. He had the mechanical knowledge from years of maintaining his truck and the business sense from years of managing his own schedule and finances. And the business grew steadily, the way things grow when someone who understands them tends to them with consistent care. And there was Samantha. He wants me to be careful here because the love that grew between Logan and Samantha was not a simple thing, and he doesn't want it simplified. They were 2 people who had both lost someone. 2 people who had been, in different ways, in the orbit of the same man. She as his wife, Logan as the brother who had never known him. They spent a great deal of time talking about Everett, which was its own form of grief and its own form of introduction. They spent time with Charlie, who grew and changed and developed the particular personality of someone who was going to be remarkable. And in spending that time, in the talking and the grieving and the watching Charlie grow, something else grew alongside it. Quietly, honestly, in the unhurried way of things that are actually real. He proposed on a Sunday morning over coffee, without ceremony, without a speech. He said, I'd like to do this properly, if you'll have me. She said yes before he finished the sentence. Mr. Thompson was the best man. He was 74 at the wedding and danced carefully at the reception, and Charlie sat on his lap for most of the evening and called him Grandpa, which Mr. Thompson bore with the quiet dignity of someone who has been given an unexpected gift and knows it. 2 years after the wedding. A Saturday in April, warm enough to leave the coat at home for the first time since fall. Charlie was 3.5 and had opinions about everything, including what he wanted for dinner, which had been under negotiation since they left the house. They found a table and settled in, and the warmth of the restaurant and the warmth of the April evening and the warmth of being these 3 people together had the quality that good evenings have, the quality of feeling, right now, in the present tense, that this is good, this is enough, this is what matters. The waitress came to the table. Logan looked up. She looked different than she had on Christmas Eve. Not older, exactly, but something that added up to more than time. A tiredness around the eyes that hadn't been there before. A wariness in her posture that was new. A quality of something reduced that he recognized because he had felt its presence and then its absence in himself. She was wearing the restaurant uniform, holding her order pad, and she looked at the table with the professional readiness of someone who has been doing this long enough to have the manner down even when the manner isn't how she's feeling. And then she looked at him. The recognition came slowly, which was its own information. She had been already past the table, already opening the order pad, already in the professional distance of service work, and it took an extra moment to land. And then it landed. She said his name. Quietly, without inflection, just his name. He said, Harper, hi. The table was Samantha and Charlie and him. And the table was warm and complete, and nothing about it needed to be explained or defended or apologized for. He said, Harper, this is my wife, Samantha, and our son, Charlie. He said it simply, the way you say true things that are good. He was not unkind, and he was not pointed, and he was not performing an emotion. He was genuinely, quietly happy, and the happiness was visible in his face and his voice, and the easy way he reached across the table to adjust Charlie's napkin. It was the happiness of a man who is exactly where he is supposed to be and knows it. Harper took their order, brought their drinks, did it professionally, competently, with the practiced ease of someone who has turned this into something she is genuinely good at. And when she set down the glasses, she said, "Congratulations, Logan." She said it and meant it, which was its own form of grace. He watched her go and thought about Christmas Eve, the note on the counter, the cold apartment, the gold box still in his coat pocket, the taillights disappearing into the snow. He thought about how total the devastation of that night had felt, how completely it had seemed like the end of something with no possible continuation. He thought about Mr. Thompson sitting at the kitchen table, hands around a coffee cup, saying with the quiet certainty of someone who simply knows, "You are not done." He had not been done. He had been, as it turned out, barely at the beginning. The darkest winters end. They always end. And what comes after, what grows from the frozen ground of the worst thing that ever happened to you, can be, if you keep going long enough to see it, more beautiful than anything you thought you had lost. Logan kept going. Through the hollow weeks and the silent apartment, through the road and the miles and the slow rebuilding of a reason to keep driving, through a gas station on a January afternoon, and a woman who said a name he didn't recognize, and a drive through the snow, and a hospital room, and the truth of a thing that changed everything. He kept going, and the spring came. It always does.